Chris Lee, Blake Lovell, and Blayne Gilmer here to preview Florida's football schedule for the 2023 season. The Gators coming off back-to-back losing seasons. Been a while since we could say that. And looking at the schedule, you got a few built-in wins, but not a lot, Blake. This is a schedule that may not lend itself to a bowl game. They're going to have their hands full to get there, are the Gators?
Yeah, I mean, I think they will. We're not saying anything. I don't think just that's out of the norm. I mean, I think anyone can probably look at the schedule and kind of knowing where Florida is probably in the rebuilding process and say, man, there's Utah, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, LSU, Florida State, all potential top 15 teams perhaps by the time the season ends. I know Kentucky's outside of that right now at 24, but again, Kentucky could be a team that gets in there. So that alone right there, I mean, that's six opponents, right? And so, right now, I think Florida would be the underdog in all those games. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, then you're looking at the rest of the schedule, right? And trying to figure out where those wins come from. Well, I mean, an out South Carolina, that's probably a game that's in South Carolina's favor if you just had to put the betting odds out on it right now. A game against Arkansas, I think Arkansas will probably still be favored as of right now. At Missouri, I mean, I think that's probably, a 2 or 3 point game one way or the other. So there is not much room for error here when it comes to Florida's schedule and trying to get, that magic number to make a bowl game. And look, I mean, this is, you guys know, and Blayne, I'm sure we'll talk about it. Like, this is not what Florida fans want us to be talking about right now. This is not where they want the program to be, where we're trying to find their path to get to a bowl. They want to be challenging Georgia and Tennessee at the top of the East. And right now, it just feels like, I don't know if this is necessarily the season they do that. So
we know that college football, even more so now than it ever has been, is a quarterback driven success football league. Okay. And you look at all the Power Five teams on this schedule and ask the question, would any of them trade their quarterback for whoever Florida's is going to be, whether it's Graham Mertz or Jack Miller this year? And I think that the answer is no. I don't think any of them would. Even Vandy with A.J. Swan, I think, has a better quarterback in place than Florida does right now. I think that's a concern for the Gators. I think wide receiver is a tremendous concern. They're going to be heavily dependent on running the football, as you said, Blake, and then their defense. The last time we saw that defense, they were over there getting beat by Oregon State pretty handily out in the Las Vegas Bowl, I believe. So, it's going to be interesting to see how Billy Napier in year two, with the losses that they lost 4 out of 5 starting offensive linemen, lost their biggest producers at receiver. It's going to be interesting to see how they can develop depth, because that's going to be the biggest piece that they're missing right here. But schedule wise, does not start off easy, Chris, with Utah.
Well, I was going to say, I'm looking at this, and I left in the ticker off the composite ranking of Utah. They're 13th in this composite. Could finish in the top 10 easily. When's the last time you saw any team bookend its schedule with potential top 10 teams out of conference?
And potential conference champions. I mean, you look at the Pac-12 has been won the last 2 years. Utah back-to-back Pac-12 champions, and then you're talking about Florida State that's making everybody plans to make a great resurgence in the ACC, and of course we know that's a heated rivalry between them and the Gators. So that's a great point. It starts off hot and it ends hot right there, Blake. There's really not much reprieve in between.
well, that's the thing. It's like, what if we were doing the college football expanded playoff this season? Like Utah, Florida State are both teams, right? But then it's like, well, there's Tennessee, there's Georgia, there's LSU. There's like, you just keep going down the line. And I mean, you're talking about, yeah. And that's why, and just to kind of sum it all up before we actually get into the schedule, like Florida could be better. I mean, maybe. I don't know. And I think if they are, the problem still becomes the schedule. And I think that's the biggest thing that I circle. And that's what we're doing is breaking down the schedule. They could feel like they're taking a step forward just in terms of consistency and all those things that we talked about last season. That was kind of the main theme. But just dealing with the schedule, that's the biggest issue, I think, overall right now. So.
Well, and they got, they didn't get a pass out on the West. They got LSU. I mean, you could have had No offense, Mississippi State or somebody else in there to make it a little bit easier, but that didn't happen. Not that any game in the West is easy. Tennessee could be a top 10 team. I mean, I'm just looking at this thing, landmines everywhere. But Blayne, your thoughts on the matchup at Utah, and not just Utah, but it's at Utah to start the year.
Yeah, it's a lot different environment, right? Higher altitude is not going to be as one thing that helped Florida tremendously in that game last year was the humidity of Florida. The swamp, that environment helped them out a lot. Plus, they had a guy in Anthony Richardson who turned out to be one of the greatest athletes to ever come through the SEC in terms of just his physical prowess and what he did. We saw that at the NFL Combine, and now without him, you got to go face a very well coached Utah team. Kyle Whittingham always has his team ready to go, and Florida outdid them last year with a stout offensive line and a very athletic quarterback that made an exceptional play in that game. Who steps up? How do those 4 out of 5 starting offensive linemen be replaced? And how does Graham Mertz, who to his credit has played in big game environments at Wisconsin on the road, so this won't be daunting to him in terms of the environment, but does he have the pieces around him to help Florida start the year off great? We'll get in detail and all that, but Blake, these first 3 games, luckily they get Tennessee at home, but the 2 out of the first 3, a tough going there for Billy Napier and company.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. And what Florida fans can say, hey, there were a lot of people last year coming to that Utah game that didn't give Florida much of a chance. And, we kind of saw what happened, but it does feel like a little bit different of a setup here, obviously, because you're going on the road this year. And so that makes it a little different. And look, you can say the thing about Tennessee for Florida, too. It's like, well, that wound up being a close game. And there were a lot of people that wondered, could Florida hang around? And that was kind of the theme, guys. And that's what, I especially look at early in the schedule is, that probably tells us a lot. I mean, these 2 games, like usually you can say, well, it may take game 6, 7, whatever, but I think we know exactly where Florida's at after the Utah and Tennessee games because it's such an interesting dynamic, just the way the schedule sets up. And we knew that last year. And then again, the inconsistency just kind of, it really took over. But yeah, I mean, this will give us a great idea of by September 16th, probably where this Florida team is at. What is their potential ceiling? Who knows, right? I mean, hey, when Florida wins both those games, what if they split it? If they split it, I think you're feeling really good because that's a quality win, no matter which one you get. And so, yeah, it's a very important start just to kind of see what is kind of that baseline for where you start to try to figure out what the expectations should be for this Florida team.
Well, the Gators are certainly going to have to take care of business in September. The only 2 gimme games on the schedule that I see are McNeese, and I was looking this up, scrolling through my phone as we were doing this. I don't think McNeese is vintage McNeese. That used to be like I don't know, maybe a top 5 team in the FCS. I did not see them ranked in Athlon's preseason poll, so that may not be one of those FCS teams that can get you on a bad day teams. Tennessee, September 16th. We'll get to that in just a second. Charlotte is ranked number 120 in our composite 131 that was put together by 5 other sources. So that should be sort of a layup game for Charlotte, which has a coaching change there. Biff Poggi, I guess is how you pronounce it. He's, I think, a analytics or Wall Street guy or something like that, if I'm not making that up. But in any case, yeah, I think the only thing worth talking about here is the Tennessee game. That was a good one last year. It is in Gainesville. That's a rivalry that the Gators have dominated. But Tennessee is clearly leapfrogged Florida, I think, in the SEC pecking order for now. And that'll be one if the Gators might have a little something more than we think. That might be the game we see at Blayne.
Yeah, the Anthony Richardson played out of his mind in that game last year, and that's the reason that Tennessee's defense struggled to defend him. So where does that playmaking ability come from? We've already kind of said that earlier on in this, and hey, Tennessee's got something to prove over there too. Joe Milton, people assume that he's just going to walk right in and just play great. Well, in his career, he's had struggles when he's been the guy from the beginning. So how does he do coming into a environment that early on in the season, will be a raucous environment there. And then, finishing out September, a physical game up at Lexington, Kentucky very talented offensively. It's going to be a different style of Kentucky team having Liam Cohen back as offensive coordinator, but it's not going to be different on the defensive front. And that's going to be strength on strength, where you've got Oxendine, JJ Weaver, all those guys along the front seven for Kentucky taking on the talented running backs, Montrell Johnson. You got Etienne at running back for Florida. That will be the strength of that team. I'm intrigued to see that matchup, Blake.
Yep. I mean, look, Kentucky, the tail of the two transfer quarterbacks, and I think as you'll see, as Blayne does his, quarterback countdown in the SEC, we do our top five. I think you'll see Kentucky's quarterback on there for sure in terms of where he's going to play. So that makes it certainly an interesting matchup. And like we said, it only adds to your first 3 or first 5 games against top 25 teams most likely. So.
Yeah, the middle part of the schedule, I think, is where Florida's got to make or break. The Kentucky game, you talked about that. The rematch with Vandy, October 7th. Vanderbilt pulled a big upset in that one a year ago, so ought to have Florida's attention there. And then at South Carolina, and what'll be a very interesting game. That's right before Carolina usually starts really going on its heater to end the season. That 3-game schedule, guys, I think that's the part that probably makes or breaks Kentucky's season, or Florida's season right there. Could make or break Kentucky's too if it lost to Florida. But I think that's a very fascinating portion right there. And some probably some, I don't know, I think you could see some very close games there.
Between October 7th and October 14th is going to be a very critical time for a particular piece of fabric around the Southeast, and that would be denim. Okay, because if Florida loses to Vanderbilt again, there will be many Gator faithful that will burn and do away with their favorite pair of jorts, their game day jorts that they love to sport down there for in the swamp. And if Clark Lee bests Billy Napier once again, I think that people will have to say, listen, the lucky jorts are gone. I'm burning them. And we're starting anew. We're going to Walmart, going to get a pair of Wranglers, cut them things off, and start new when they travel over to Williams-Brice Stadium. Blake, do you think that the demand for jorts will be up or down after October?
How did I get put in the follow-up position for this? This is like to defer the question to someone else. I don't know if we've ever talked about jorts on any of the shows we've done. We've done hundreds of videos at this point, and I don't know if we've ever actually brought that up. Chris can be the fact checker on that to see if we have.
I don't believe jorts have come up before. No,
Chris has big aspirations. So, anyways, it should be. Yeah, I mean, look, it's as you guys have talked about it.
Never do a video while you're watching your favorite baseball team blow a big lead. By the way,
if you want a complete debacle, go watch the Alabama football schedule preview. Yeah. But the Vanderbilt South Carolina games, they're huge, like we talked about earlier. Just for in terms of Florida's. Again, could be bowl, aspirations. I mean, not just big aspirations for a bowl. And so, I mean, those could be the 2 games that we wind up looking back at, and knowing what else is on the schedule. There's no doubt, very important stretch of games. But hey, at least you got a week off after that South Carolina game before you get ready for a really tough stretch to finish the season too for the Gators.
You know who's missing a marketing opportunity? There is a company called the Big Ass Fan Company. Their logo is a donkey. They should really sponsor a bowl game and call it the Big Ass Bowl Game is what it should be called. So, hey, but now we're hitting the off week and we're getting ready for Georgia on this Florida schedule.
I've had it on mute, but you guys have upset Oreo. You can probably hear it by now. I think it was the jorts comment, Blayne.
That's how they'll sound if they have to burn their jorts, like Oreo howling at the moon right there. It'll be rough, and Billy Napier will be putting cotton in his ears.
All right, Blayne, we're just going to give you the analysis on Georgia, Florida here. Let you have it.
It's not going to be close. There just couldn't be too many. The rosters are in 2 totally different directions right now, and Billy Napier's doing everything he can on the recruiting trail. If people will be patient, I have a lot of fun right now with what's going on with Florida, but if people will be patient with Billy Napier and suffer well, as the scriptures say, through this year, then I think, he's going to be able to do some good things a couple years down the road with the talent that he's bringing in. But the disparity right now between Florida and Georgia, Florida and LSU, Florida and Florida State, even for that matter, with what Mike Norvell has been able to bring in is just just too much of a gap right now, and it would take a monumental effort, I think, for Florida to win those games. So I think, to your point, Chris and Blake, they need to take advantage of that, all those games they can before the bye week, because after the bye week, the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I mean, we can just. I don't have a lot to add to the Georgia game right now. I mean, Georgia's, as we said, the favorite to win a third straight national championship. So I don't know how. Yes, it's a rivalry game. We understand that, but again, to me, I can't properly judge that game right now. And if I had to, it would just be based on what we've seen and what I've seen from Georgia. But where is Florida? After the first 7 games, we don't know that yet, and so it's hard to know. But yeah, I mean, like we said though, like beyond that, right? It's Arkansas, it's at LSU, it's at Missouri, it's Florida State. I mean, that is a brutal. This is just an entire. I mean, really, you look at the schedule. I would have to think Florida has one of the toughest schedules in the SEC. I mean, I don't. We'd have to compare it to all the others we've done, and it may be the toughest schedule. I don't know, but like Chris said earlier, when you have 2 opponents that are potential top 10 teams outside the conference, knowing what you're playing, and now we see Georgia left on the schedule, LSU left on the schedule, and then of course Florida State. Then you got 2 teams in Arkansas and Missouri that look at their best. They could beat Florida, right? I mean, and that's not even to say like to knock Florida. It's just those could be 2 teams that overachieve too this season. So yeah, it's just a wild setup for the schedule. So
and Tomo's a weird place in general, Chris. It's just weird. We've said it. I just want to state, and every video we must say that playing at Columbia, Missouri is like stepping into the Bermuda Triangle. You never know what's going to happen over there.
Well, what's it going to be on November 18th too in Columbia?
Yeah,
it's going to be cold.
Sleet
and
I
was at Vandy, Florida a year ago, and it was cold, and Florida had issues. So, I think you made a good point a minute or two, Blayne, about Napier. I'm big on the hire. I think it was the right hire. I think Florida's got a Dan Mullen problem right now more than it's got a Billy Napier problem. But this is a program, and I get the East was not 2 years ago what it is now, but this is a program that fired Jim McElvain on the heels of winning the East twice in a row. And I feel like, I don't know if one of you guys can whistle. We need to, start doing the Axl Rose whistling patience in the background as we go through the last portion of the schedule, because I wonder if fans are gonna have it. It's the closest thing to a rebuild the Gators are in the middle of right now. We think Arkansas at LSU, at Missouri, Florida State. I mean, just not a gimme in there. And you see programs in the SEC all the time. You see 1 or 2 a year. Happened to Auburn last year. It's happened to Auburn multiple times. We saw it happen with Florida a couple times. Tennessee, A&M. Like when expectations are really high and you don't meet the fans' expectations, where they are reasonable or not, things start to go sideways everywhere. And I'm very curious as to how they handle the last portion of the schedule if things are not going well.
Yeah, especially if that Georgia game turns out to be a blowout, and then you have to follow it up with the team that probably could win the West this year a couple weeks later, LSU, and if it just glaringly shows how far away you are, people are going to be frustrated. People are going to be calling for Billy Napier's job if that happens, whether that should be the case or not. You would think that Florida's admin would probably be a little bit more prudent than to go down that route only 2 years in. But it is a what have you done for me lately type league, and it does not help you, Blake, when your arch adversary in the SEC is vying for a third straight national championship, and your cross in-state rival could potentially be having a renaissance and making its way towards an ACC championship this year.
Yeah, I mean, in Tennessee is, they obviously had the comeback year last year to get back on track, and you talk about Georgia and Florida State, and yeah, I mean, that's what we said, guys. I mean, for Florida, as I said earlier, I mean, it's not just, the history is not just how do we get to a bowl, it's how do we win the SEC East, and it's a long road to get back there when you've kind of gotten to the point Florida's at. I will point this out though before we wrap up. It is interesting to look back at last season. 8 of their 13 games decided by 10 points or less. And, they won some of those games. They lost some of those games. And we talk about kind of how things can change from season to season when you find yourself in some of those close games. Sometimes you don't get the bounces you need. Sometimes you do. And maybe it takes another season to get those. Maybe it's more experience and just kind of having more cohesion as a unit on certain parts of the field. But I'm just curious to see how they handle the schedule, the consistency overall, and if they can. Look, there are some people that I've seen that have Florida right outside the edge of the top 25 heading into the season. I don't know that we're the people that are going to put them there. Actually, I can tell you for certain we're probably not going to put them there. But there is a very mixed bag in terms of what people think this Florida team can achieve. And I think that's going to be interesting to kind of see what the fan expectations are going into the season, because it's the SEC. Everybody wants to win. And as you guys just said, the magic word, patience, not always there when it comes to this level of college football.
The big aspirations continue at Southeastern 14. Well, you're going to preview every single SEC football schedule for the coming year. Going to preview teams individually, tons of stuff we know, some stuff we haven't even dreamed up yet. Best way to get it all, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. For Blayne Gilmer and Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon.